Welcome everyone to CodiumAI in Action. I'm David Perry, and developer advocate here at CodiumAI, and I'm joining me today is Jonathan Click. He is a sales engineer here at CodiumAI. I'm going to do some housekeeping before we start. We have a chat like many of us have been referring to right now. We'll be monitoring that. If you have some questions or you need to interact with us and raise your hand, you can do that. We also have Q&A. So if you have a direct question you want us to answer, please feel free to put that in the Q&A. We might not get to all of them during this time, but we will answer them. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan to take it away.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. So really excited to speak to you today. My hope, by the way, is that many of you, most of you, all of you have actually downloaded the product already. If you haven't, and this is your first exposure to it, that's fine as well. There is a URL on my screen here, the Get Started URL that you'll see in the middle of the slide here. That is a great place to go to. And we have a free 14-day trial that comes with that for everything that we're going to talk about today. If you do have the product installed and running and you're in the middle of evaluation, or you're a customer who's getting acquainted with the product, feel free to follow along. In fact, feel free to ask questions. Maybe you're trying out some of the things that I'm talking about in the presentation today, and you have questions about those. Feel free to throw them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and we will make sure to take care of you. But let's go ahead and dive into this. First, to kind of get you guys acquainted, if you're not already aware of this, is kind of our philosophy, what we're really trying to achieve here at CodiumAI. And it's really around code quality. In fact, if you think about kind of in general code generation nowadays, which is all the craze, everybody's trying to do it. Writing code and speeding that up is important, but it's really only a small piece of the greater equation that we're all trying to solve for. In fact, we're going to be talking about workflows in a moment. And as we talk about that, think for a moment that, like, before I can actually take the code I've written and submit that effectively as a PR, there's other steps that need to happen. A lot of times I need to document my code. I might need to write tests for my code. Hopefully I'm writing tests for my code. And some of those things, frankly, are a little bit like tedious. They're time consuming, and it's not fulfilling. A lot of us just want to code. We want to build things. We want to fix things. And a lot of those other things kind of like take up time and really aren't a fulfilling part of our job. And can we automate those sorts of things through AI? And so when we think about this and kind of like and trying to build higher quality code and not just shifting the burden, the bottleneck from writing code over now to reviewing PRs, where now they're stuck with kind of reviewing more PRs than ever, and then also trying to, judge the code quality now because, of course, AI being in the middle. What we want to do here, and this is what we're going to be talking about, there's two big facets that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about CodiumAI, which is our IDE extension, which is probably the bulk of the presentation today. We're also going to be talking another part that's kind of part of the same solution, which is called PR Agent, which is basically living with your Git provider, whether it's GitHub or GitLab or Azure DevOps or Bitbucket, and helping to review PRs to make that faster and more effective. And so when we think about technologies that are supported here, I think this is a good point to kind of pause and talk about this, because there is a question in chat here. It's asking like about officially supported languages. Where does Rust sit? Things like that. In short, we support all of the major languages, plain and simple. There are some additional pieces that I would call the cherry on top for some of the languages. So if you're using like a JavaScript or a TypeScript or a Python or a Java, some of those languages, about a half dozen of them, we have some additional functionality to kind of streamline that, some things that we had to purpose build for those. But if you don't use one of those languages, your experience is not going to be diminished. And I'll explain why as we get into the demo. So first off, all major languages supported. The second part is when we're talking about IDEs, today we support via Visual Studio Code and we support JetBrains. So if you're one of those people that's still using like just using Visual Studio without the code, or using like Eclipse, those are not things that we support yet today. And we hope that you'll be able to find a home though within using us within JetBrains or within VS Code. And then I already kind of referenced the variety of Git providers. We support pretty much all the major Git providers as well for PR Agent. So let's continue on. Let's get into the fun stuff. So this is the outline we're going to be adjusting today, guys. And hopefully by the end of this, we are going to be able to get you fully acclimated to using the product. And that's going to be the key. This is not just like me trying to tell you why the product is wonderful, even though it is. It's also about helping you to actually adopt this, right? We've all been there. We've all brought tools in internally, not just like IDE tools, but a variety of different tools, and seen a lack of adoption sometimes. The goal today is to help you think about things in terms of workflows and where our tools can fit into those. So as part of that, we're going to be talking about in CodiumAI first, we're going to be talking about really 4 different phases, as I'm calling them. And you'll notice that none of these phases are really like SDLC phases per se, but like the first part is like understanding the code that you're working with and how we can help with that. Building code, such as like using auto completion, asking questions of the chat and whatnot. Polishing the code, which is going to include like generating tests, finding flaws in the code, documenting code, and then finalizing it, which is where now you're in a mode where you're going to commit that code, you're going to submit a PR, and the things that we can do to actually help with that. And then once it gets moved over into the PR world, we're going to talk about PR agent and how that can help you speed up your code reviews and make those code reviews even more effective. And that's kind of the outline today. So now that you're all completely bored, what we can do is dive in. But I'm actually curious. We talked a little bit about some of the challenges today and some of the challenges that we solve for, some of the features we have. I'm kind of curious for those of you who want to pull up your chat and you want to message hosts and panelists. I'm just going to do an impromptu poll here. Like, which of the things have I mentioned so far that sound most interesting to you? I'm just curious if there's any areas that, like, from the audience that you feel you would want me to focus time on. Not that I'm not going to cover it, but I'm just kind of curious. And while you do that, David, I mean, before you joined Codium, you were a customer. I mean, what were the parts of Codium, whether it's PR agent, CodiumAI, a specific feature, what were the parts that you like the most, if I'm not putting you on the spot?
You're not putting me on the spot. I would say, coming from my background too, I am a big proponent on test-driven development. So I started before CodiumAI chat actually was a part. It was just CodiumAI tests only. And that was a big feature for me, to do test-driven development on a piece of code or on a new method that had no kind of functionality yet. So I actually got my test cases just based on the name of the method a lot of times.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And we are seeing where some of the things that are coming in chat here, where someone's mentioning PR agent stands out to them. Another person's mentioning like explaining code, documenting code, things like that. So there's some good feedback from the audience here. Like I said, we're going to cover all of it, but I was just kind of curious, like kind of where your minds are at and what's most exciting to you. Another person, code quality analysis. So let's go ahead and without further ado, I'm going to share out CodiumAI. I'm going to share out my IDE. I'm going to share out VS Code. So just so you guys know, kind of the stack, so to speak, I'll be working with today. I'm going to be using Python, VS Code, and GitHub. If you're using different languages or different IDEs or using even a different Git provider, don't worry. The functionality is pretty much the same, but I had to pick one to go with today, and so I did. So starting with this, let's pretend for a moment. In fact, the code that I have in here, it's a really large class with a lot of methods in it. It's basically an API wrapper. And so let's pretend for a moment, as part of this, I'm in a mode where I've been asked to come in and build, say, a new method for this. And one of the first things I need to do, and some of you guys probably find yourselves in this position, where like one of the first things you need to do is understand what's been built. And in part because a lot of times the code we're looking at isn't something we built. It was built by somebody else, perhaps even years ago. Maybe that person isn't even here anymore. And one of the first things we need to do is try to understand like what is it that we should be doing with this, or how should we be using this? So as an example of this, I'm going to go ahead and one of the things you'll observe if you have this running on your end is you've got this CodiumAI options selection right above classes. And if I come in here and I say explain, it's going to go ahead and give me that explanation. And so one of the other things I'll just note while it's generating really quick is that I could likewise easily just come in here and type a slash command in the chat and type slash explain. In fact, if I just type slash, you'll see there's a large variety of commands here I could be running. We're going to cover several of these as we talk about workflows. So let's take a look at what it gave us. So kind of scrolling up a little bit, one of the things it does here is it kind of breaks down for us the inputs for this function, the flow, kind of the flow of the code and what happens, the outputs. And then up here, it also gives us an example of usage even. And this is kind of standard in my experience, that it's going to help you to kind of give you a code snippet of how I would actually practically use this code. The other part that's really kind of important and fascinating to note right now, and this is a kind of a distinguishing feature of how we operate as a product, is references. So you will notice that it's actually saying from this repository, here's certain files and directory paths and lines of code from these files that were used in the generation of this response. It's kind of showing your work, if you will. If you remember the old school math days where like, hey, don't use a calculator. We want you to show your work. This is very much the same way, where as an LLM, sometimes it's a bit of a black box, and we want to know how is it coming to these sorts of conclusions. We want to be kind of very transparent in that. There's another piece that's really important as well, and this is going to kind of dovetail into many of the other functions I'm going to show you, not just explaining code, which is the focus, the context. You can select those things. And in fact, right now, because I just used the function up here, you'll notice that like it's selected not only the file I'm working on, but that very specific method to be as the focus for my question. I could very easily change the focus here. I can also come in and add additional context. And in fact, many of the times when we're working on a project, it's one code file working in conjunction with many other code files. There's base classes and so forth that might be in other files and whatnot. And I want to kind of use those other files as context. So I can either go ahead and pull in those files individually, like I have a test file right here, where I've created some unit tests and integration tests. Or in this case, I might just want to add in the full project folder with all the different files that are included and make sure, and you see that right in the bottom right here, it took, if you blinked, you maybe missed it. It took like 3 seconds. It just indexed all of that additional context. Internally, it's something that we call local RAG. And if you're familiar with RAG is all the rage nowadays, right? Retrieval augmented generation. But basically, again, the idea is that we're indexing that content locally to make sure that that is a part of the context for when you're interacting with our product, to make sure that the appropriate, again, context is leveraged as part of that. So how are we doing so far, David? Any questions or comments so far? I haven't been able to keep as good a chat and Q&A.
Yeah, so I have one, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the name. Well, I'll try. Agneslav is asking about custom rules. So they have some development in their coding conventions. And so something like instructions, and I'm taking this as probably for PR agent, but I'm not sure the context or if they're talking about CodiumAI, because we do have instructions in CodiumAI too for when you're generating the tests. Oh, for both. Okay, so yeah, he said in the chat. So I know this, but Jonathan, I'll let you handle that if you want to hit PR agent on something where, or if you're on here in CodiumAI right now, you can do the test and show them the TOML file with the extra instructions there.
Oh yeah, you know what? We'll definitely cover that more in depth as we progress. For now, one thing I would note, and this is an important detail, when you're asking, when you have commands, in fact, down here in general, like for example, this is a great one that we'll probably talk about in a bit, like docstring. I want to document my code for me. I wrote this beautiful new function, and I don't want to sit there and try to document what I need to document. You can add optional instructions. This is kind of your ad hoc way of doing it. So in this case, like maybe in Python, like there's a couple of different like standards for Python doc strings. There's kind of like the Google format, there's the REST format, and I could add in that additional instructions to kind of say like, hey, like this is how I want to do things. But as we progress and talk about PR agent as well as some of the other features later on, there are ways to kind of like bake that into your configuration. So you don't have to actually prompt it like with additional instructions, that it can be just baked into what you're doing. So we'll definitely continue to tackle that as we progress. So we just started out with the basics, right? We just talked about explaining code, which is kind of a simple task and but an important one, especially if, for example, I think David, you and I were talking like you're traditionally what, a Java developer, correct? You were looking at some code like someone else had written, and I think it was I don't remember what language it was, and you were like, I don't really understand fully. I understand syntax and I can generally get the gist of what it's doing, but you could use that function to maybe understand a language that wasn't your primary one. Is that accurate? Would you add any other colors to that?
Yeah, I would say actually, we have a project that we've done that was with Facebook and it's called Cover Agent. And I helped commit some code to Cover Agent in using it to test out Java, but it's written in Python. So I actually used CodiumAI to help me write the Python code and actually even do the tests to add to our own Python projects.
It was actually a sneaky ploy to pull you over into my world of Python. In any case, we have a religious war over here. He's a Java guy, I'm a Python guy. So let's go ahead and move on and keep on and going then. I do see one other question I want to tackle as we're continue doing this though. We didn't really talk about security. We didn't talk about architecture. That wasn't necessarily in scope for this meeting, but I'm seeing like LLM, which is this based on? By default, right now, it is using GPT-4o. One thing that you'll be seeing rolling out in the very near future is also being able to do Claude 3.5, which is doing phenomenal nowadays when it comes to code testing and so forth, or just in general for code tasks. And then also there is the ability to be able to do like a fully air gap scenario where we provide you a model we have trained to be able to deploy this. So we're not going to go into depth onto deployment options and so forth today, but like if that is a topic of interest, security or otherwise, that's something we could take offline, reach out to us. Happy to talk to you further about that. So we've talked about explaining code. Let's talk about the next part, which is building code. So if I go ahead and let's do an example here. Like I have a method here for get a collection object by ID. What if, like, for example, I wanted to build a collection. I wanted to be able to get collections by name. Let's do like definition. Let's see, get collection by name. And then the idea here, by the way, I'm just going to pause there for a second, is that in much the same way, many of you have used code completion tools before, it does that, right? So I can go ahead and continue to have it complete things for me. And it's going, in fact, what it's doing right now, by the way, which is very valuable, is it's acknowledging that I usually do pretty in-depth doc strings for my functions and making sure to use the same structure and format that I would use. And in the end, it goes ahead and produces the code I'm looking for. And again, it's using the structure and best practices and so forth that it's discovered from all the other code that it's seen that I have written, and that is part of my context. Now, the other part of this, though, is let's go ahead and scrap this for a second. I know that's like horrible. I just scrapped all that beautiful code that was created. But like another possible way that allows you to be able to also iterate upon things is through simply asking, right? So I can come into the chat box here and I'm going to go ahead and say, write a method that gets a collection by name. Now, the beautiful part about this, by the way, earlier when I showed you kind of right here, it says from this repository, and you can see like the lines of code and the files that were used. We actually say from this repository for a very specific reason, which is right now, the way I have this configured is that it's, in fact, you can see it pulled details from my README files and so forth. The reason that we say from this repository is because for our enterprise customers, if you happen to be an enterprise customer or you're considering being such, is that we're able to index additional repositories and as part of the solution, and include that, and you guys can host a Postgres database. It can index those additional repos. We have one customer who has what they call golden repos, I think like 5 of them, that are kind of like the picture perfect image of best practices and documentation of code and whatever else, and use that, for example, that now you could actually have context coming from other places. And the reason I find this particularly valuable, I'm going to talk about the results here that appeared in a second, is because when I'm using basic things like ChatGPT or other chats that I've seen in the past that I've personally used, the idea is that a lot of times it only knows general coding knowledge. It doesn't know my company's things. It doesn't know my practices. And so it can incorporate those best practices. In fact, I could probably even ask questions about my internal organization's best practices. And if that has been indexed by Codium, that those answers can be appropriately given. Now, in this case, of course, we only have the local indexing taking place, but even that is just wonderful, where it comes in and it gives me, again, the specific details I'm looking for. It gives me the code snippet. I can insert that code directly into wherever I'm at. And then also goes ahead and gives me further details about like what it's doing, the use, how I would go about using it, and so forth. And one thing I'd note here, this is almost like a training topic, is that every time we give a response, you don't need to take it at face value. If, for example, it generated code and you were like, but I also want it to do this. I also, in this case, in fact, it's actually raising an error. Maybe I didn't want it to raise that error. Maybe there's something, maybe I want to handle that differently. I can easily modify that myself, or I can come in and say, continue this chat. And now I'm in a thread and I can continue to iterate upon this, which sometimes is necessary with the LLM. Maybe it didn't have everything in it. It didn't read your mind, and it needs additional information to be able to be effective.
Can I jump in there, Jonathan, real
Go
quick?
for it.
And to say that you guys, we're still the drivers. So you're the developer. You have the full picture. And I would say that we're not trying to replace you. So that's a big part on this. So if you see this, we're assisting you. This is think of this as your coding mate or your pair programmer.
Love it. So we talked about building for a moment. We talked about code generation. It works as you would expect. In fact, in my case, you saw that I just typed the function name and it kind of anticipated what it is that I was trying to build. We can use the ask method over here on the side, and we can go ahead and ask it questions. And if we have the right things indexed in context, it can use that to be able to create more effective results for us. Now, however, once we've done that, the next part about that is what I call polishing. Before we can ship that code or go ahead and try to send a pull request, for example, or a merge request if you happen to be GitLab users. The other part of this is that we want to be able to do all the other pieces that are necessary. So one of my favorite parts, and this is a wow factor for many of the customers I work with, which is our test suite functionality. So I'm just going to actually keep this selected. I'm keeping this class stack client selected, and I'm just going to go ahead and run /test suite. This is the best way to usually run this function, is just through the / command, and you'll see it kind of auto populates right here. I could give it additional instructions if I wanted to. For example, like I worked with some PHP folks recently. Yes, PHP is still a language, believe it or not, people. And they went ahead and said we use PHP Pest for or Pest PHP, one of the two, which is the testing library that they typically use versus like the default one. And they could add those additional instructions to say, like, this is how I like to generate unit tests. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and type and hit enter. And it pops up this wonderful pane on the right side here. And I know I work at Codium. You probably expect me to use adjectives like wonderful, but like, this is really kind of astounding. This is more than just like me going to a chat box and saying, hey, generate some tests for me, and getting a couple of tests and whatnot. Let me show you what I mean by that. There's a lot of API calls to the LLM that makes all of this a reality. And it starts really with the behaviors coverage. What we're doing here, before we even generate tests or think about generating tests, are we actually appropriately generating the level of code coverage that we need. I can tell you that I can think of a lot of edge cases right off the top of my head, happy path cases, things like that. But I'm probably not going to think of every possible one. And this helps me to kind of see all of those different scenarios. I'm not even going to read these off per se. If you want to screenshot them, you can if you really wanted to. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and click generate test on a couple of these. By the way, you might also notice that when I expanded this out, it shows sub behaviors to generate tests for if I really wanted to. So there's really like, it's very, very robust and kind of just helping you to increase your code coverage. Now, as part of this, if I scroll down a bit, you'll see that those tests are actually being generated live right now. And that's it. Like, that's amazing. Now, by default, if you're using this, just to let you know from a usage standpoint, this is focused on unit tests. So you will see like mocks, things like that as kind of the default state. My experience recently, especially because this is like an API wrapper and it was really important for me to kind of do integration tests, I actually included, you can at the very top of this, if you want to improve test quality and style, your best way is to give it a sample test. It's that simple, right? You stop kind of fussing around with an LLM, trying to expect it to give you exactly what you want. Tell it what you want. Give it an example. And in this case, I effectively gave it an integration test, and it goes off and actually gives me in return integration tests I'm looking for, rather than kind of the default, which is to give unit tests. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you guys because I thought that this is a really important thing. But also, I actually have two other pieces I need to tackle, and then I'm going to pause, David, for questions. You can
Well,
share other color. Oh yeah, you
can
want to
I
do
just
something, say something
add,
right now?
can you click on the configurations tab and show them, because you might have something you want to share with everyone. So that unit test, you might want to just have your whole team share. So if you do that, you can do that through this TOML file and check it
Oh,
in.
I love that. In fact, I was just talking to a customer about this earlier today. And when I showed this to them, they were excited because they're like, we're trying to standardize tests and how we build tests and what those look like and so forth within our organization. And so this is what I showed them. You can, of course, as I said earlier, give instructions like the examples. You can give additional instructions here, but let's standardize on this. I'm going to go ahead and click on here to create a new configuration file. So it immediately pops up a template right into a tab in VS Code in this case. And I'm going to actually just go ahead and uncomment some of these lines that I think might be helpful. There we go. Uncomment those. Now let me talk about this. So most of the configuration options that you see here that you can do right within the IDE, customize them for yourself, you can do as an actual file, as a TOML file. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, first, for your own personal and selfish reasons, if you wanted to, you could save this TOML file locally and use it so that now every time you're using CodiumAI and you're in your IDE, it always uses the same sorts of recommendations, the same sort of testing framework, the same instructions you want to give it for when it generates tests, the same example tests. That's wonderful. Now, if you're someone who's a little less selfish and you want to kind of share the wealth, what you can do is you can save this file and submit it as part of the PR, get it merged into the repo. So the next time someone goes ahead and clones the repo locally to start working on things, building tests, and they're using CodiumAI, we're going to use that TOML file to be able to make sure that this wonderful kind of testing configuration setup that you have, everybody can take advantage of. And then from kind of a standardization standpoint, you could just kind of include a similar file across many different repos and make that the case. So anyway, I apologize if I got a little overexcited about that, but like that is something that excites me, David.
Well, and I still like it because if you guys look here, the .local, that allows me to put that in my get ignore file. So I don't accidentally put that into a merge request because it's my own secret sauce. So I might want 50 unit tests or something like that to happen. As someone else, the base might be 6. So it is have a hierarchy too. So you can have both of them work together and one will overwrite the other one on some of the things you have.
Exactly. Let's kind of fast forward a little bit more. So we wrote code, we went ahead and we can easily generate tests for that code, which is frankly, again, one of the parts that people love about our product. But there's a couple of other pieces that I can do here to kind of polish this up. I talked about doc strings earlier. We're not going to necessarily demo doc strings. It's kind of boring, but helpful, where I can take a function that doesn't have a doc string and tell it to make me a doc string. And then I can copy and paste that in. In fact, if you look at some of these wonderful detailed doc strings that I have in here that are like almost overwhelming, I mean, these were actually generated by CodiumAI, just to kind of give you a sample of that. It saved me a bucket load of time for all these different methods and whatnot. The other thing, though, is beyond doc strings is a command that's called improve. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to go and select the entire class here for a second. And I'm going to run the /improve command.
One of my favorites.
I know, right? This was actually a favorite because this project we're looking at right in here, by the way, was actually just a personal project. It was an open source project I was working on for an API wrapper. And so I was like a lone developer on it in this case. And running /improve was just a godsend to me, because I was all of a sudden able to like get additional insights and feedback on what I wrote. And in fact, it takes this whole experience to the next level, where like I'm not just getting code suggestions, I'm actually having something review my code for me. Was there a particular reason or example that stands out to you, David, when you're thinking about, like you said this is something that really excites you? Is there a story behind that, or is there something that you would have me tackle?
Not tackle, it's just I have uncovered and found bugs using the improve, where that it will make a suggestion. So not just for performance or stuff, but like security, and it'll saying, hey, you're using the wrong version of SSL, or doing some other, returning a wrong status in your HTTP response when you have an empty object. So instead of not found, it's you're sending 200 and sending an empty body. And so little things like that, it just, you're like, wow, I missed that.
Yeah, we have. By the way, you have a kindred spirit in chat, David, who said that like improve is one of their favorite commands too. So in any case, yes. So you'll see here, by the way, just in my experience, anything that has like a security tag or label or a performance tag or label are usually like really awesome. Like things that like, oh, that's a really good point. In fact, sometimes I'll be honest with you, it doesn't even necessarily relate to the code that I just modified or wrote. Sometimes it's just like I've had people who said like, Jonathan, is there actually a way that I can just like run this across all my repos like right now and just like see like all the things that we should be going off and improving for our code? We don't have a way to do that today. It's more ad hoc, but this is definitely something that's exciting to a lot of people. But let me show you how you would actually use this though. It's really nice that you're getting these suggestions, but how do you actually apply them? So what we do here first is let's go ahead and say improve type checking in this. Great. Maybe it's a best practice type of thing. It kind of it gives you additional details on like what it is that it recommends that you do. And then you can even preview the code, which spits this out into a nice diff to be able to see. In fact, this is a great example here, right? Like this is, if any of you are Python fans, this second instance right here, the one it's recommending, is way more Pythonic than using this example right here. It's not something that's going to make or break my code by any means, but it's definitely more in line with kind of coding standards, best practices, and so forth. And it's just kind of a nice little thing to probably tweak while I'm in here and using the code. Whereas some of these other ones, like updating a proxy setting to avoid unnecessary assignment, maybe that could actually be impactful. But the idea is I can come in here and I can check as many of these boxes as I want. I can even get more suggestions. And then when I'm ready, I can go ahead and click prepare code changes, and it's going to create a diff view for me that actually has all of the things. And in fact, did I lose track of it? I think this might be it then. Let me close out some of these extra tabs here I don't need. In fact, we can close out this panel here that's getting in the way. And so the idea is like you could check all those boxes. It'll create a single diff. And then when you're ready, you can click apply changes, and then it will make all of those changes for you accordingly. So really kind of cool stuff. So that's the polish aspect of this, right? We've built some stuff. We want to polish it. We want to make it better. The next part about this I'll cover in quick succession is then really kind of getting that code ready for a PR review. finalizing it, which to some extent, generating tests, doc strings, improving code were important. But to kind of tidy this up, one of the things you're going to notice in the bottom left corner here, again, selecting kind of what to focus on, rather than selecting the current file, I can actually focus on a git diff. I can focus on local changes. I can focus on staged changes. I can focus on committed changes. And so if I was to, for example, before I ever commit this, I could come in here, I could click on stage changes, and maybe I've made a lot of changes. In fact, I wasn't really thinking about like all the little things I kind of tweaked along the way, and I want to kind of get a recap or whatnot. I could come in here and I could say /commit to get a commit message with a change set. Oh, sorry. I don't have any stage changes at the moment. That was a bad example. Let me try local changes here. And I'm going to go ahead and run the same command. And let's go ahead and word wrap that. So remove the deprecated question, answer, user group, and impersonation methods from this. And so it gives me a nice little command commit message to be able to use. Taking this a step further, if I wanted to submit this as a PR, what I could do here is I could come in and do commit change, go to select commit changes, and then go ahead and select, let's see, describe, where this is going to actually give me a full title and description for the PR that I'm submitting. Which again, the idea here is think about someone down the road is going to have to now review this. And what can I do to make sure I'm giving them ample information as part of that PR review? And so you'll actually see right here a more complete description of the sorts of things that have been done. And I can easily go ahead and copy and paste that and then include that as part of a PR. So that is CodiumAI in a nutshell. I'm about to dive into PR Agent, but before I do so, I want to just check in with the audience, check in with you, David. Is there any other questions or topics or color or otherwise?
So I have one right now, and it's dealing with the kind of security bug issues does improve find. What kind of security issues? I think that's a good one.
That is a good one. So there's a couple that stand out to me. It's probably not a comprehensive list, and we're definitely not a replacement for like a Sneak or for like, I don't know, maybe like a static code analysis tool or something. But like we do spot things. There's a few that have come up recently, even in customer engagements. One was a kind of what I might call a little Bobby table scenario. If any of you remember the XKCD comic where there's a SQL query was not being properly sanitized. And so kind of making sure that that was taken care of. In fact, I've had some fun running /improve against like actually some popular repos out there that are publicly like open source stuff on GitHub and just having fun and seeing what sort of things it can find. There was another one recently, not necessarily explicitly security related, but like we all know kind of the CrowdStrike scenario that happened, and that was due to a null pointer reference. And I know some of us are using memory safe languages nowadays, but like if you're not, like I actually just had, and this actually ties into PR Agent, maybe this is a segue. I had a customer using PR Agent where just recently we actually run a very similar command, a /improve on PR Agent. And one of the things it pointed out actually was a potential null pointer exception scenario. And not only did we point it out to the PR reviewer, but they actually used the code that we included in the suggestions, like modify it to do this, to actually remediate that and included it as part of the merge. And so that's just another example that stands out to me. I don't know. Is there any other comments from your end, David?
No, I was just going to go off one more question we have. Let me see if I can pronounce it right. Agnislav, and it's regarding like context. And do we have a way to kind of have it automatically go and try to check for context and load a context before instead of having to pick it on there? And from my opinion, or what I have, since I'm always working on different things or as I'm tackling a problem, the reason why we don't have this automatic context is I'm loading different files or maybe the whole entire project, but a lot of times I want to get more specific. And you can get a little bit better input sometimes if you know exactly the context you're working on. You can do the whole project, but if you pick certain files, then you can have a more fine-grained homed in answer. So I believe, it depends on how you're using it, but we don't really have that, out of the box configuration here, load these README files or load this text as a context.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the other thing that might be worth noting is that this might tie in with the enterprise solution, where we can kind of index additional like repos and repositories. That would probably include indexing like a standard like best practices document or wiki file or something like that. So like that would be part of it. And then yes, if you do happen to include like some sort of best practices within a repo or project, and that's part of what's found locally, that would also make it possible for us to kind of include that in any sort of recommendations we give inside of CodiumAI. So those are a couple of options. Hopefully that helps. So let's go ahead. We've got about 15 minutes left, guys. You've been wonderful so far. Let's go ahead and tackle PR agent. And in fact, everything that we've talked about so far has almost been a little bit like shift left, right? So rather than just relying on PR reviews to make sure that code is good, you're given the tools through CodiumAI to generate effective tests and review your code and all those other things. Now, assuming as kind of that final gate before something gets released, this is what we do to help out the people who are reviewing those PRs. In fact, I wonder how many of you are involved with reviewing PRs and how much you love that. But let's talk about what we can do to make your lives easier. In fact, I know there was at least one of you who I asked, what would be most exciting to you in this demo? It's PR reviews. So in any case, here's what the user submitted as part of the PR review, right? This is what they said. This is what the PR is about. What we do, there's a few automated tasks we run. In fact, these tasks in PR agent is highly configurable. I'm just going to kind of talk about the default configuration of what happens and maybe kind of sprinkle in some other anecdotes that would be helpful to you. The first is that we come in and run a review command, or a describe command, I mean. And the idea behind the describe command is we edit the original message that was created by the user, and we leave what they said. We don't want to take away from that, but we do a few things. One, we come in and add custom labels. And in fact, there's some really cool configurable functionality behind the scenes on this, where if we notice that, there was some SQL changes made as part of this PR, like we can automatically label it. You see labels over here. We can automatically label this PR with certain things, maybe a security tag or a SQL tag or a label or whatnot. And we want to make sure that like the right people are actually, because we know that a lot of you are using labels to kind of trigger certain involvement and so forth, to get certain people involved with certain PRs and so forth. And so this can actually automate some of the labeling that goes on based on the PR itself. The next part, however, let's get into more of how we make your lives easier, is breaking down a detailed description of what's actually being changed in this PR, and then categorizing that by enhancement, tests, configuration changes, dependencies, documentation. And then if you were really interested, which in many cases you will be, you can expand this out to get the detailed description of what was changed in a particular file. And then of course you can then click easily on this to go and look at the file, look at the diff, to actually, now that you've kind of figured out, okay, this is what they're doing, now you have that context to actually review those lines of code and be able to observe it through a slightly different lens. This, however, though, is really just the beginning. This is just purely to kind of get your bearings on this PR. Where the real magic happens and where we crank this up to 11 is in the next two parts, the PR reviewer guide and the PR code suggestions. PR reviewer guide. Sometimes we're sitting here wondering, can I get this reviewed before lunch break? Was this a small PR? Was it a big PR? Is there potential bugs, risks? Were there tests involved? There's a lot that might go into whether or not like a PR looks like a potentially heavy amount of effort. And so what we do is we score it from 1 to 5 based on our assessment of, does that look like it's going to be a big one? Like this is going to be something I should schedule the next hour to do? Or is this something that I can get done in the next 15 to 30 minutes? And so part of some of the details that go into that are found right here. Like, are there relevant tests? No, there were no tests submitted as part of this. So therefore, like if this developer is not testing their code, that might be a problem. Or how about this? Are there any security concerns? Again, we're not a replacement for like a Sneak or something like that, but we do try to pick out these things where we can as part of the PR process. And then lastly, key issues to review. There's a potential bug, there's some potential code duplication, which by the way, code duplication, I do not want to understate. A lot of these code assistants and so forth, including our own, are really wonderful at kind of picking out existing code and existing structures of code that exist to help us code more quickly. But unbeknownst to us, if we're just relying on code completion, we might actually be creating duplicate code, duplicate functions that exist in other pieces of code, and we're just completely unaware of it. Again, we don't own all of the code. We didn't write all of the code. So if there might be refactoring opportunities available. And so one of the things that we'll be doing through the PR reviewer guide is helping with that, as well as kind of showing similar things down the PR code suggestions. If we see opportunities to kind of handle potential bugs, code duplications, not only will we score these for you and show you the top suggestions, but if I expand this out, it'll give me a very detailed description of what it is that we're recommending and why, and then even giving the code suggestions. And this goes back actually to what I was talking about earlier with the potential null pointer exception, where we said, actually, this is what you should probably do with your code to be able to avoid that. And they were easily able to go ahead and copy that code to their clipboard and be able to commit that code accordingly to improve it. So that is PR agent. Again, that's at a high level view. There's other things we do. But like those are the key, most valuable things. And yes, we do allow you to be able to add a bunch of configurability to this. And I'm giving you a quick example. If I flip over to, I think I actually have this in a Bitbucket repo right now as an example. Here, this is just giving you a sample of what a configuration file looks like for PR agent, which by the way, can be configured at a global level and can be configured at a per repo level. The per repo level will override if you use a setting, like say, like I want to do a certain setting at a certain repo, it will override the global setting accordingly. But like we have a customer where, as an example of this, we were talking about improve, right? What you may have noticed, for example, is we give 4 code suggestions. That's the maximum code suggestions that we provide when that command is run. And you saw 4 when I was looking a moment ago. You can raise that, you can lower that, depending on how noisy or not noisy it is. You can add extra instructions like, hey, don't include recommendations regarding documentation or logging messages. You can set a score threshold. Like, remember, there were scores on those suggestions. If I wanted to go ahead and say like, okay, no, don't show me anything that's below a 7. There's a lot of things that can be done behind the scenes to kind of tailor this to your needs. So usually what we're doing is we're providing a wonderful out-of-the-box experience, but then working with our customers as they have feedback for us and being able to use these configurations to be able to really kind of meet the needs and actually, frankly, tailor the needs, because every organization, what their best practices are, what their tolerances are, how much they're rubber stamping their PR reviews versus actually taking the time to review them. Like all of those things can really kind of create a very distinct situation for a given customer and how we can help them with PR agent. So just a quick sampling then of what we can do from a configuration file standpoint to kind of tailor it to meet someone's needs. So what I'm going to do, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to pause, David, and we're just going to talk about anything else that's on people's minds, questions or otherwise. And
Yeah. Well, I was letting you go there, but I wanted to bring one up that Yar Ben Ari has brought up about the PR agent. Where can you find that? So they were asking, I think it's a good question. There's a couple ways to install it. If you're using the enterprise, we have the application, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
yeah, so yes, if you go to, in fact, there's a get started link right here. And in fact, if I go to that right now, let's just open up a tab, codium.ai/get started. We'll have a lot of the information you need right here to be able to do this. Additionally, if you go ahead and actually create an account, and you'll be able to, there'll be further details on how to configure it and whatnot from there. Either way, like if you're going to set this up and you're curious and need help, reach out to us. reach out to support or reach out to info, whichever, and we'll take care of you. I want to make sure that each of you have the attention that you need. And unfortunately, we're not going to cover like a full tutorial. The other thing that I would note here is we do have documentation. And in fact, if you go to, let's see, PR agent. Oh, actually, I probably have it over in another window. 1 second.
Well, while you're doing that too, a
Yeah.
really interesting one came up because we have a lot of our customers that asked for this. And Daniello has asked, hey, do we do on-prem? And I would say, yes, we do. And I would say, please reach out to us. And because you're asking what kind of large language models and other things. So we have many different ways to configure and to do an on-prem. And so if you reach out to us, we can, ask and get some more information to you so that we can get that set up for you.
Yes. By the way, I have the URL up here. There's the PR agent documentation is here. Again, I don't have a chat to kind of like send it to you guys right now. If you want to screenshot that, whatnot, you can. That is where our documentation lives for a PR agent, and we can it gives you full details in there. I am seeing a question as well regarding what additional functionality does Enterprise PA or PR agent offer over the open source offering. That is something we won't be able to cover today, but one of the things that stood out and I think kind of ties into Danello's question is really kind of the RAG component stands out to me is the ability to go ahead and configure it in a way that you can go ahead and add in multiple repos as part of kind of a more full indexing of the code repositories and making it smarter in that regard. I'm trying to think of some other examples. We might have to just take that one offline. But the other thing that stands out to me too is per what you were saying, David, is the deployment options are really wide and diverse. If we take a look at, let's see here, I actually have another here. I'll just go ahead and present this really quick. If you think about how you've got our product, Codium, if you can call it middleware if you want, and you've got OpenAI or an LLM, there's a variety of different combination of those things, right? So I mentioned earlier, we're using ChatGPT, we're using GPT-4o. Some customers are using Azure OpenAI. They have their own license. They want to use that. They don't want to use our zero data retention setup. They can do that, right? So now we've kind of diverged a bit, right? We've now got two options. And then also we've got Claude 3.5, Anthropic. That's going to be another option. We've got an on-prem LLM that can be deployed in an air gap scenario. That's another option. Now that's just on the LLM side. On the flexible deployment options, we've got multi-tenant SaaS, we've got single-tenant SaaS. We can deploy it on-prem and like a hardware VM physical server standpoint. We could deploy it cloud-prem like AWS, GCP, or whatnot on your environment. You kind of get the sense, right? There's a lot of flexibility here, and one of my jobs as a sales engineer at CodiumAI is actually working with customers to kind of figure out their needs and scope those accordingly. We've been working with some companies that have very sensitive data. They work in very sensitive industries, and we were able to successfully meet their needs. So hopefully that wasn't too verbose. Hopefully that was the detail that you need.
Yeah, I think the big deal is reach out to us. We will work with you.
Correct. Yep.
And that's about all of them that I can see. I do see one from Agneslav, and I can tell you, like the safe harbor kind of thing, I can't tell you exactly what we're working on or our roadmap all the way, but I can tell you that when you talk about the Jira issues and other kind of technologies kind of feeding in, if you hear our CEO and see some of his talks, this is the whole complete picture that we're talking about and that our vision is to reach. It's not just to do this, but it is to have the full encapsulation and that more system level thinking. So your spec agents and your insights and working with that. So for the question with someone, I think Agneslav, please stand by. We are working on those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the beginning. The idea of Codium 8 and PR agent, we want to do an end-to-end experience for the entire SDLC. And in fact, one of the things you can find if you want to play around with it, we have Cover Agent already open sourced in an alpha on our GitHub. You're welcome to play around with that. That helps with code coverage as well. and that will eventually become a part of the greater platform of solutions we've been talking about today. So again, I don't want to talk too much about all the stuff that's wonderful stuff that's happening in the future, but suffice it to say that having a cool code assistant inside of an IDE is really just small potatoes in comparison to the grand vision here of all the things we can be doing to make your lives better and easier, and to ultimately generate higher quality code, not just generate code faster, but to actually have higher quality code, less bugs and whatnot. So anyway, thank you everyone for your time. We are at time right now. It's been wonderful. You've been a great group. And then hopefully we'll go ahead and send out the recording to all of you, and you'll be able to take advantage of it. If not, hit up our YouTube channel and it will be posted there for sure. Thank you, everyone.
Happy coding with CodiumAI.